as a sort of farewell video to PoE1, even though it's still going to be updated, so it's not really a farewell. I put together this list of top 10 legendary PoE1 builds. There have been countless iconic builds throughout PoE1's history, so if there is more interest in this, I will make more episodes of this leading up to PoE2. Comment below what you think is the most legendary build throughout the years. Coming in at number 1, we got WORMBLASTER. WORMBLASTER first came to prominence on March 16th, 2016, when or also known as C9Q9MD, uploaded WORMBLASTER the first. WORMBLASTER is not just one build, but an entire group of builds that are based around the writhing jar flask, which shoots out worms every time you use it. You then kill these worms to trigger a bunch of effects. It can either be something as simple as an explosion that occurs after killing them, such as Herald of Ice or Herald of Ash, or as complex as triggering spells in a certain order to deal massive damage, such as the Dark Pact version of this build. It uses Azanath's Chant to spawn skeletons whenever you attack with a bow. Then you use the Mother's Embrace belt to have your minions use your flasks when summoned, which you would equip 5 worm flasks to cause a ton of worms to spawn off your skeletons. Then, when you killed them with your bow attack, Null's Inclination would trigger socket and minion spells on kill to hit the skeletons with Dark Pact, but you could also socket more than 1 Dark Pact in your bow, so you would have 2, I think was the optimal amount, and then you would trigger both of them with 4 damage links for just insane amounts of damage. And then, on top of this, you would also pretty much heal your entire HP pool every time you attacked, because you also got sources of % HP restored on kill, and you're constantly killing dozens of worms, leading to thousands of HP per second. Now, WORMBLASTER just existed for a long time, constantly evading nerfs, changes, and it's still alive. There's even builds today that still work, even though they're all wildly different from another, using different mechanics, but at the core they still revolve around the writhing jar flask. Number 2, Vaal Spark. Vaal Spark has existed for a long time, since 1.1, before most people even played the game, but it wouldn't become a legendary build really until 2.0, the Awakening expansion, which was Warband/Tempest League. In this expansion, 2 jewels were added, which made Vaal skills crazy OP, but Spark was probably the biggest of all, with constantly clearing the entire screen with a ton of sparks everywhere. And this is not nearly as common as it is now, so back then it was really crazy. The 2 jewels that were added are Sacrificial Harvest, which gives a chance to gain an additional Vaal Soul on kill, and Chill of Corruption, which also gains chance to gain an additional Vaal Soul per enemy shattered. With these 2 stacked together, you got a ton of Vaal Skulls, so you could just constantly spam Spark and clear maps in under a minute. I believe this was mainly played as an Inquisitor, but I'm sure there were other variants as well. Also, shout out to Vaal Fireball, which was also another viable skill, which did effectively the same thing, but I think was less popular. And now a word from our sponsor of this video, Boot.dev. Hey kid, come here. You wanna set yourself up for the future with a great job, great pay? Boot.dev is what you need. You'll learn back-end web development from start to finish in Python and Go. It's not just a get-rich-quick scheme though. Boot.dev really believes in going in deep, taking the time on the fundamentals so you'll be truly prepared for a job in tech. Help you through this with your fried dopamine receptors we all know you have. Boot.dev makes it easy and fun to learn to code by turning it into an interactive RPG game. This way you'll never get bored and gets you to write a ton of code. Truly the best way to learn. You just gotta jump right in. Now let me show you the goods. We got XP, levels, achievements, quests, a Boot.dev Discord community server that is active and there to help whenever you get stuck, along with a 30-day no questions asked refund policy, free demos of course of every course, and more. Go to Boot.dev and use my code DSLE to get 25% off your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Coming in at number 3 is double dipping poison builds. Now this is also not just one build. It was used by many, primarily dot builds like poison. The main one I remember is Poison Blade Vortex. As far as I know, double dipping builds existed all the way up to 3.0, which was Harbinger League. And that is when they changed the damage calculations for dot builds, which no longer let it double dip. So the double dipping with poison was essentially just getting way more damage than it should have by abusing, well, maybe not the way that it should have. It was the way it was calculated. It was just really OP. So it works something like this. Increased damage mods would apply to the initial hit, right? And then the poison damage would be calculated based on the hit damage the initial hit did. And then the poison damage would then also get scaled from the original increased damage mod, therefore double dipping on the original increased damage, giving you just a ton of damage. Coming in at number 4, Aurastacker. This was the result of cluster jewels being added in 3.10 or Delirium League. Now, aura bots and other various aura builds like snapshotting were always around, of course, but this was a different beast. You got 90% all res, a bunch of energy shield, a bunch of damage, cast speed, pretty much every stat in the game, at a time when this is much harder to achieve than it is now. This could be played on several ascendancies, but the main 3 were Guardian, Ascendant, and Champion. The build revolved around voices, cluster jewels, and then socketing as many medium clusters with Purposeful Harbinger and Heraldry as you could to get a ton more aura effect and reduce mana reservation. The build used Prism Guardian for even more mana reservation efficiency, Nebulous to scale a ton of damage with your huge amount of resistance, Low Life with Shabs and presence of Shayula to reserve even more auras with your HP, and then potentially you would even get more auras on your jewelry to save gem slot space. This all added up to be by far the best build at the time. You were your own aura bot and you had actual damage. You didn't need to be in a party and you just annihilated everything. Number 5. I think Ward Loop is a perfect example of what people think of when they think of crazy PoE builds. A bunch of crazy interactions coming together to just have an absolute nuclear bomb, screen-cluttered mess of a build. It uses Heartbound Loop, which deals physical damage to you on minion death. This damage is then used to make a loop with cast when damage taken to cast a bunch of spells. The loop is made by constantly spawning a bunch of skeletons, which then deals more damage to you, causing more and higher level cast when damage setups to trigger. To not die to the tons of damage you're taking from this loop is where Ward comes in. Use the Olroth's Resolve Flask to make Ward not break and the Trader Timeless Jewel Keystone to give it 100% uptime. Then you also use damage recouped as life to regen life. Then there is some cooldown breakpoints I'm not going to get into. All of that to just have your screen covered by a bajillion skills at once. Number 6, Tornado Shot. One of the longest running popular builds, surviving many nerfs, and even now is still decent with a large investment after it just received a huge nerf last league. Tornado Shot is definitely a fan favorite with basically infinite scaling possibility, full screen clear, so many projectiles, and eventually you delete the bosses with all your projectiles and enough investment. There have been many different flavors of the build throughout the years like Omni and a few others. Definitely deserves to be on this list. The most common ascendancy for Tornado Shot has been Deadeye. However, there have been a few other infamous Tornado Shot builds like Firegrass's Occultist Poison Tornado Shot. If you don't know about that, long story short is the build that ended up being way worse than it was portrayed as and ended up ruining the league start of many players who picked that build, including Firegrass himself, who stopped his stream after getting farmed by bosses. Coming in at number 7, Ele Buzzsaw. Why did builds have cooler names back in the day? We should start calling builds by new names instead of just going like Skill Ascendancy again. We can call things like Bleed EQ Menstrual Blast instead. Ele Buzzsaw was basically just Spectral Throw with elemental damage, popularized by Mathel's build guide. It was also just an unascended shadow. This build was before ascendancies. You got a jeweled foil with elemental damage rolls, some elemental damage auras, and that's about it. Way simpler than builds are today. I've also heard somewhere, I'm not sure if GGG themselves stated it somewhere, or if it was just an estimate, or I'm insane at making things up, but I've heard from Mathel's guide on the build, they generated over $100,000 on MTX for Spectral Throw alone on this build. Coming in at number 8, Vaal Molten Shell. Another Vaal skill on the list. This is a Scold's Bridal build. If you don't know what that is, it's because it's rarely been used in recent years. It is a unique helmet that causes you to take physical damage when you spend mana. This has been used in a variety of ways, such as triggering skills and some other weird interactions, but the main memorable build for it is definitely VMS. This build also predates Ascendancies, however, it continued to be played when they came out, like on Jug or Elementalist, and I'm sure on others too. The interaction was simply casting VMS, then casting skills to take damage, and making it pop constantly, rolling blades through the map and exploding everything. Then you use a channeling skill like Incinerate or Flame Blast to have it explode constantly until the boss is dead. Coming in at number 9, we have Kinetic Blast Wander. Honestly, this build maybe deserves to be higher. This is a pretty classic build to me. I feel like back in the day, this is kind of the mapping build a lot of people strived for, at least in my memory, until it becomes like Tornado Shot as the standard mapping build. This build, again, predates Ascendancies, but was good for a while and ended up being played by a few Ascendancies like Deadeye and Pathfinder primarily. Elemental based and using Piscator's Vigil as a budget wand until you crafted a GG, Elemental Imbued Wand, and Crown of Eyes are the main items in this. This was also during the glory days of Vessel of Vinctar, a bonkers OP flask back then. Now, in the golden days of this build, I'd say you had Frost Wall, which had a shotgunning effect on it. You stack a bunch of Frost Walls on a boss, and then you'd use KB, and your KBs would act as if the Frost Wall was an enemy, so you get a ton of explosions on them. This interaction was used for other things as well, and was eventually nerfed at some point, I think before 3.0, I think. Coming in at number 10, we have Pizza Sticks. The first real build I actually played in this game was Pizza Sticks Hierophant. 2,993 days, 22 hours, 47 minutes, and 22 seconds before the making of this video. Before that, I basically just equipped random gems and got blasted. Anyways, this build is super simple and straightforward. League starter that was super popular back in the day. Totems, which are the sticks, casted Flame Blast, aka the pizzas. You drop a totem, explode a pizza on your enemies. It's great for birthday parties. This build would often be used to respec into more complex builds, which would require higher end and specific gear. For example, you would go like Pizza Sticks into Vaal Spark Inquisitor.